Hey everybody, Chief Meteorologist Brad Panovich here. Welcome into WCNC Plus as we track some hot weather heading our way. The last couple of nights, and really going back to last week when we launched our show here, we were tracking a lot of storms every single day. It felt like there was rarely a quiet afternoon or evening. Now tonight, I can actually say for once it is relatively quiet. We do have a few isolated showers and storms, especially in the mountains and the foothills, but they're really isolated right now. I'm going to zoom in on those and we'll show you, yeah, we've got a little cell that's moving through basically eastern Caldwell County into northern parts of Alexander County. That cell is building here in the last couple of minutes. Watauga County's been the hot spot this evening and really this afternoon. We had a severe thunderstorm warning earlier, and like the warning we had last night in York County, it only lasted like 5-10 minutes and then boom, it was gone. So these are kind of what we call pulse storms. They pulse up, they get severe quickly, and they dissipate. Also some flash flooding. I do want to show you there is one warning. It's in our area. It's not in the Charlotte metro, but it is up there towards Martinsville up in Virginia. We've seen one severe thunderstorm warning up in that area until 6:45 p.m. And I'm going to widen the view out a little bit and show you that, yeah, for most of the Piedmont, you know, all the activities have been canceled the last couple of nights. Tonight's kind of a night to make up for some lost time. You can actually get out there and enjoy some warm weather. It's kind of warm, and that's kind of the story. But we may not be completely out of the woods yet, because what's interesting is this line of storms that is building down in Georgia and accelerating northeast. Now, it's pretty far away. It's a good probably 5 hours away from getting up here. I'm going to pause this because if I do a long storm track on this, we'll do a big old storm track, I'm going to assume they're moving close to the same speed of our other storms, but they might be moving a little bit faster. Let's see if I can get a track up here. So yeah, Charlotte around 11:41. So that's tracking it going at about 35 miles per hour. Move it over here so it's a little easier to see for you guys. So Gainesville, Georgia, Athens, Florida now. Sevierville over there near Gatlinburg around 7:35. And then Augusta, Bristol, that little line basically around 9:30 to 10 o'clock. And so Shelby 10:30, Columbia 11:15, possibly Charlotte Concord midnight, maybe 12:30 or 11:30, I should say. And that's kind of reflected in our hour-by-hour forecast. So if you do have evening plans, you're going to be okay until sunset for sure, which sunset tonight's coming up at 8:40. So sunset at 8:40, you should be fine. But after 10 o'clock, you see that 60% chance of storms bumping up there around 11 o'clock. That's when I think we'll probably see that line of storms move through the region. Now, the bigger story coming in here is going to be the heat over the next couple of days. As we start to see that heat build, that is because of a heat dome heading our way. But tonight, you can see the new severe thunderstorm warning for Georgia. That's up there in the Gainesville area, north of Atlanta. That cell right there is one we'll watch because that's the line we could see later this evening heading our way. So on the left, you see our future cast there. Let me just go show you what our future cast says those storms will do. And I'm going to pause it right about 10 or 11. It shows a pretty good cluster of storms getting up here around 10 to 11 p.m. So whether it's that expansive or not, I think is probably up to some question. But I do think there's going to be storms at some point between 10 o'clock and midnight tonight. And that's very similar to what we saw last night. We saw a secondary surge of storms. Not that they were severe, but boy, they were putting on quite the light show and some heavy rain after 10 o'clock until about midnight to 1 in the morning. Heavy rain moved through the Charlotte metro area, then eventually moved up towards the Lake Norman area. I'll go through this here real quickly, and you can see 11 o'clock to midnight, and then it kind of shifts off to the east, and we start to dry out. And then we'll start turning our attention to the big heat dome, which will be building over most of the country. This really starts to crank up this coming weekend. If you've never heard of a heat dome, it's basically a giant mountain of air in the atmosphere. It's a ridge of high pressure. It causes air to sink. It suppresses cloud cover. It causes warming. This kind of pattern usually gives us our heat waves and sometimes can lead to drought reintroducing itself. Not that we're in a drought now. Thankfully, the rain that we've seen in May and now June, which has been a lot. I've had a lot of people say it's rained a whole bunch, but remember, we were in a drought 6 months for basically 6 months going into May. So we needed this above average rainfall to get out of the drought situations. But that heat dome is going to be parked over us and most of the eastern half of the country. And so that's going to turn our attention to excessive heat that's going to be over us. So the heat risk the next couple of days, our impacts here, you can see tomorrow and Thursday, I expect major impacts from heat. Friday, because that cold front moves through and actually knocks a little bit of an edge off of the high dew point air, which is that air you can wear, it actually won't feel as bad. But then Saturday, Sunday, it gets a lot worse from there. In fact, some of the heat indices, just looking at some of the early forecasts for Saturday, Sunday, and possibly Monday, you're talking 100 to 105. So we're not weather alert for those days yet, but those are definitely potential days where we could be alert for high heat. And remember, heat is the number one killer of all weather phenomena. People, I think, for whatever reason, don't take it as seriously. It just impacts more people, very young, very old, impacts athletes, even well-trained athletes. I feel like every spring and summer, we run into issues with athletes at practices and camps who overheat, and we end up with either heat stroke or in some cases even situations where we lose lives. So hopefully that's not the case, and that's why we want everyone to take this very seriously going into next week. And just to give you an idea on what that heat dome looks like, the 6 to 10 day temperature outlook, you see the bullseye over the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic. That's a 90% probability of above average temperatures. So for late June, early July, that's typically when our average starts getting close to 90. You're looking at a 90% chance of above normal temperatures, which means at least low to mid 90s, and in some cases upper 90s, and with the humidity could feel even hotter than that. So we'll show you the 10-day forecast here to just give you an idea. I normally would just show you the 7-day, but I got to show you all 10 days because you're going to want to see when does this come to an end. So here's a long, good look at your 10-day forecast. You can see tomorrow, low 90s, Thursday, low 90s, and probably some pretty good storms late Thursday. I don't want to undersell this either because potentially we could see some pretty good storms with that weak front that comes through Thursday night. That's why you see Friday. Friday is the cool down. 90 degrees, folks. That's the cool down. And a morning low of 69. That is about as cool as it gets. Two things to notice. The temperatures jump off mid 90s, certainly 94, 96. Any one of those days, by the way, could be 2 degrees warmer than that. Could be 98, could be flirting with triple digits. But notice the overnight lows. The overnight lows is your tell about how humid it is, because the air temperature can't drop below that dew point, remember. So the overnight lows in the mid 70s tells you it's pretty sticky, and that means the afternoons, those feel like readings, the dreaded heat index, or what your body feels, is going to be closer to 100 to 105. And that's a real temperature. I know sometimes we run into weird social media comments about people think like the wind chill and the heat index is a fake temperature. No, that's what your body feels, okay? The heat index is actually very well tested for what your body experiences. Basically, your body's ability to cool itself gets impacted by the dew point and the air temperature. You know, the number one way you cool yourself is sweating. So if you can't sweat and it doesn't work, your body wants to sweat more. And when you sweat more, you start dehydrating. So you get into that vicious cycle of I'm sweating more, I'm not cooling myself down, and you start dehydrating yourself. So you double up with dehydration and overheating. So that's what happens when it's super hot out there. So take this very seriously as we go into next week, especially starting Sunday. So let's talk a little bit about national weather. We talked yesterday about flash flooding, and we've had a lot of it out there. We're going to focus on where the big storms are right now, and it's the Midwest. We've got this swirl, I think it's the same swirl we were tracking up in the Northwest earlier, but you can see this video out of Kansas City of the storms that came through there. Big time thunderstorms this morning, and this is part of a storm system that made for some very picturesque tornado images out of Nebraska as well. It's been pretty incredible to see some of the images of the tornadoes that have come out of the upper Midwest and the northern plains. But this is parts of Kansas where that upper low is moving through, and that's actually where we have severe weather in the central and northern plains again today. That's been a very active part of the country. In fact, let me pull up the severe weather outlook, and we'll kind of show you a look at the severe weather outlook in the middle of the country, because that's where we've seen most of the activity. Not that we haven't had a little bit of severe weather in our area recently, but I'll kind of show you the wider view here in a second. That's the radar. That's what's over the middle of the country. You see that area. I'm going to put a pause point in here in a second so you guys can see this. But that's the low risk in the mountains. And again, it is extremely low risk. We're not expecting anything too strong or severe, but that's a low risk when you see the yellow. And for us, that's an extremely low risk. But I'll move this to the middle of the country, and we'll show you where the severe weather is ongoing. You see the medium and then the higher risk. And you see that area shaded in black, in hatch. So what's that mean? Significant risk of severe weather. And when there's a significant risk, that means there's a heightened risk of either wind or hail, or sometimes even tornadoes. In this case, I believe this is for wind, because we've seen a lot of these basically bow echoes with some of this setup out there. So that's primarily because of the wind threat that we have in the middle of the country. Yeah, that's pretty significant, and a 5% tornado prob. The wind risk there, I believe, is 45%. So that's pretty significant. So areas from Wichita, Kansas, down to Oklahoma City to Tulsa, this will be an area we'll be watching this afternoon, because many of these areas are going to see a lot of severe weather this evening. So if you have friends or family in the middle of the country, that would be in an area that we would definitely have severe weather ongoing. And then the next couple of days, that risk will start to shift off to the east. So let's talk about the flash flood risk, because we've had a lot of that in the last couple of days. We're going to go up to Pennsylvania, because look what's happening in Pennsylvania right now. More rain. This is an area that saw flash flooding in the last 24 hours. And what you're looking at now is video of some Girl Scouts that were actually rescued. James, where was this in Pennsylvania?
So, Brad, just like yesterday, we were talking about flooding that happened in West Virginia. And when we were talking about West Virginia, we're talking about that little panhandle between Ohio and Pennsylvania. So this is Allegheny County, which is over there in that Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania
very close
area.
To Pittsburgh. Yeah, and look at that. So these Girl Scouts, probably at summer camp, looks like they were stranded like in an area and had to be rescued because they were surrounded by water. And so firefighters doing their job. Look at that water flowing in the background. That's always what you worry about in the summertime when you're camping or you're in the outdoors. One of the problem is that you're very susceptible to seeing a lot of severe weather, and you don't always get warnings in those areas. So that's always a concern when you have severe weather in areas where you don't have good cell service or you don't have TV service, and you end up seeing a lot of severe weather. So it's interesting looking at the radar there out of Pennsylvania. Once again today, seeing a lot of heavy rain up there. I don't know if they've had any flood warnings. I haven't seen any. There's a couple in the middle of the state right there, so I'll zoom in on them. Actually have one tornado warning too, so boy, there's a lot going on in Pennsylvania right now. So you see Puxatawny, that's where our good friend, the forecasting rodent, lives. And then we've got Pittsburgh there, and we're at Oakmont, where they had the U.S. Open just east of there. Boy, you talk about a lot of rain, but watching the U.S. Open last weekend on WCNC, there was so much rain. And then we've got a tornado warning down there near the Maryland border, near Cumberland, Maryland, Hagerstown area, Wisp Ski Resort there in the western part of the panhandle of Maryland this go-around. It's a very interesting part of the country. You've got kind of Pennsylvania, Maryland, and West Virginia. You can go between all three states probably multiple times driving through there. I've driven through there, and it's crazy how many times you cross in between different states because of the orientation of the state boundaries there. But a lot of active weather currently ongoing up there in Pennsylvania from Altoona down towards the Cumberland area of Maryland. But if we widen this out, you can see how we're kind of surrounded. And as we just saw, we've got some strong storms coming up through Georgia. So don't sleep on those strong storms. We might end up talking a lot about those coming up later tonight on WCNC and WCNC Plus right around 11 o'clock. So you're probably going to want to make sure your phone is charged up just in case. And potentially we could see some strong storms. And I think right now the timing of that may be 10 or 11 o'clock.
Here's a live look outside Atlanta.
Oh, that's Atlanta?
Give people an idea of what's coming here.
So that's near Gwinnett, it looks like right there. Mm-hmm. It's absolutely pouring there. So that's right outside of Atlanta, northeast of Georgia. That's where we have a severe thunderstorm warning right now. And that cell looks like it's for wind. But the leading edge of that has definitely picked up a little bit of steam here in the last hour or so. So there's that severe thunderstorm warning pretty much coming up straight up I-85. So again, if we time this out, this is probably 10 or 11 o'clock. Let's say 10 p.m. to midnight into the Charlotte area. So kind of interesting. Tonight, there's not a lot of weather locally, but there's a lot of stuff going on around us. Oh, and by the way, we're in the middle of hurricane season. And that's going to lead us to our next topic tonight, because we talked a little about hurricane season last night, or last week, I should say. And one thing we didn't get into was some new modeling that's coming up this season, or some new tools we have in the toolkit to forecast this year. But we want to take a look back at last season a little bit and talk to the hurricane director, Ken Graham. He's going to talk, the National Weather Service director now, Ken Graham, talking about some of the potential improvements we've seen, and it's been stunning. Probably the biggest achievement in forecasting has been from the Hurricane Center. So let's listen to Ken.
The strongest hurricanes are the ones that develop the fastest. Ready for this stat? I may repeat it more than once. Every Category 5 storm that's ever hit this country was a tropical storm or less 3 days prior. Please help us remind to the public that the impacts are well outside the cone. The cone is a cone of error. It's where we expect the center of the storm to be 2/3 of the time. So 1/3 of the time it's outside the cone. So we've got to remember that. And this year we did such a great job with the forecast, the cone got smaller this year. So the better we do, the smaller the cone. It's based on the last 5 years of error. And we saw the forecast improvements firsthand in 2024. And the skill was better than ever. It was amazing to watch 2024. Helene was forecast to be a major hurricane, take this, before it was even a depression. It was a bunch of clouds, a couple thunderstorms. And we were able to have the confidence in the modeling, confidence in our products to be able to say, we're going to issue a cone, we're going to put out the products, we're going to do that based on a clump of clouds. The National Hurricane Center was really aggressive doing that, and we were right on the money, and it saved a lot of lives.
Yeah, I am, we're not to toot our own horn here as meteorologists, but it is amazing. I think hurricanes are one of the ways that is the most, I think, easily recognizable way that forecasting has improved so dramatically. I always give the example of, and now it's a long time ago, the Galveston hurricane of 1900. If you've ever read the book Isaac Storm, it's based on that storm. There was literally a major hurricane off the coast of Galveston, Texas, and the people were on the beach and had no idea it was there. That doesn't happen anymore, folks. We have so much warning, almost too much warning in some cases. I want to take a look at how the improvement in the forecast track has developed over time. So this graphic they put out at the end of every season, which is pretty cool to see that the Hurricane Center puts these out. But this is the official track error. Now the bottom line is the 24-hour error. That's 1 day. The green line is 2 days. The yellow, let's call it yellow mustard, 3 days. The brown mustard there, the brown color is 4 days, and the blue is 5 days. And you notice the 4 and 5 days only go back to about 2001 because that's when we started doing 5-day cones. Before that, there was only a 3-day cone. So look at the improvement over time. And you heard Ken discuss this in that clip, that especially for like days 3, 4, and 5, it was just 20 years ago, which I know seems like a long time to some folks. That really wasn't that long ago. The air was between 200 and 300 miles. That air is now below 100 miles. Okay? That is an incredible improvement. And the 24-hour forecast is less than 30 miles, I think. And last season was pretty amazing. And we can look at last season's storms to kind of give you a gauge on how well those were forecast as well, because one of the storms, unfortunately, that impacted us heavily was Helene. It was actually one of the most well-forecasted storms of the 2024 hurricane season. In fact, last year, you'll see these kind of these storms here. Most of them were very well forecasted ahead of time, especially in that day 2, 3, 4, 5 range. So, James, let's look at the forecast errors for the storms. So I know it's a little hard to see, but the lower those bars, the better. Now, you see some of the higher bars, that's because those are days 4 and 5. You expect the longer range forecast to have more error, but I want you to focus at the very middle of the screen. That's Helene, okay? The entire Helene forecast, I think, was less than 50 miles of air for days 1, 2, and 3. Helene was a really well forecasted storm, and I think we take for granted how well we're doing with these forecasts. Now, one of the biggest issues we had in forecasting wasn't the track. It was usually intensity. And last year, we saw some really big improvement in intensity forecasting. And what I mean by intensity, how strong the storms are. And we've seen a propensity for storms to go through what's called rapid intensification, which is they get really strong within 24, 36 hours. Ken talked about it as well. I think most of our major hurricanes last year, I think, what did he say, James? Within like 2 days, they were tropical storms. They became major hurricanes.
Yeah, they went from almost nothing to a Category 5 in 3 days.
Yeah.
That is rapid intensification by the definition.
Yeah, so we're seeing a lot more of that, and we're getting better at forecasting that. Now, do we get the exact mile per hour right? But we're not really, but we're forecasting that it's going to go through rapid intensification, which I think is a huge improvement. And one of the new tools that we're going to be able to use going forward, and you're hearing this buzzword all over the place. You hear AI, right? Artificial intelligence. I will tell you honestly, in meteorology, we've been using AI for a lot longer than people think. We called it machine learning, which is another name for AI. Most of our modeling, we've been experimenting with machine learning for a long time because it makes sense. We've got to crunch a whole bunch of numbers in meteorology. If you ever have any inclination about going into meteorology, and I have my intern Lily over here, she could attest to this, you will be shocked the amount of math you have to take. It is so much math. Calculus, differential equations. What's the worst class you had to take, Lily?
By far, calculus too.
Yes.
Terrible.
Yeah. Calculus is brutal, because everything we do is a giant equation. And because of that, that's where artificial intelligence and machine learning helps us, because to crunch that amount of data, you need supercomputers and AI to shorten the time that it takes to calculate. Our biggest issue in the past was the computers weren't fast enough, but now artificial intelligence can help speed up the process. So Google believe it or not, has become a big player in this, and they have a forecast model that they're going to start experimenting with called DeepMind. They've had a couple versions of it, and they actually released this last week, I believe it was. It might have been the week before. We were going to talk about it last week, but we ran out of time. But they released a public-facing website called the Weather Lab for cyclones, and what you're looking at here, and I'll zoom in on it, and I'll play this too. This is the forecast for Helene last year, and the black line is the actual track of the storm. All those other lines are the models that we use to forecast it. Now, a couple of things jump out to me. First of all the models were really good with Helene. This is probably why it was such a well forecast storm last year. But if we zoom in closer, you see the dark blue line. I'm going to turn everything off but the dark blue line here so you can kind of see it. The dark blue line, that is Google's experimental model. And you could see it wasn't as good as the actual storm. In fact, it wasn't even as good as the Hurricane Center. The Hurricane Center beats every model. So that keeps us in business, James, right? Because humans still can outperform the models. But you know why we outperform the models? Because we use all of them. We blend them. We use them as tools. So we're going to have a whole show on this. I know Brittany wants to do a show on this about social media and misinformation. So this is just like of a side note. If you see a single model run posted all over social media, this is a prime example of why you ignore it, because when you blend all of the models together, they do good. Single models, not so good. And James, it's interesting to see that Google's gotten into this and kind of showed that it's done pretty well. But the one model that did really well was the European model here. You can see that's the yellow one right there, and it's actually kind of outperformed some of the AI modeling. So even some of our old school modeling is done pretty well.
And leave it to big tech to design a website that is fairly user-friendly for the average person to use.
Yeah.
You know, we were talking to Lily about the amount of math and the amount of technical jargon that goes on. This is a pretty well-designed, accessible website that anyone who wants to come learn and compare can roll up their sleeves.
So I love this fact that you can show like all the ensemble members. And for folks that don't know what an ensemble is, we don't, even these models, there's not one single run. They'll run it like 30 to 50 times and then take the mean. And that's how you end up getting a better forecast. You simulate the atmosphere multiple times and then come up with a mean or a most likely scenario. And what that does is it weeds out the outliers, the extremes that we know are unlikely going to happen. And anytime you want to talk about a forecast, give me an ensemble forecast, it's always going to do the best. So I'm going to jump to the most recent because that's historical. Let's look at what's happening right now. This is a real-time look at the data showing if anything's going to develop. And we're starting to see the possibility of something developing over in the Pacific. And because of that, you can see this is kind of cool. And James is right. This is a very slick website. It looks amazing. It shows all the individual tracks of the storms that the models think are going to happen. And you notice there's not a lot out there. So it shows a low pressure trying to develop right there, and we do have a storm that is going to form. And so it's kind of interesting, and there's actually, I don't think there's even a forecast coming for it, but so some of the models are completely missing this over there. So this is what Google AI is trying to do, the experimentation. This is, if you look at the top, it says preview, and there's a very good disclaimer at the bottom. I love this disclaimer. I'm just going to read it. Weather conditions and cyclone tracks are approximate and for informational purposes only. They are not intended for consumer use, okay? For official weather forecasts and warnings, refer to your local meteorological agency or National Weather Service. That is a great disclaimer that I love they put on there, because even James, when we look at stuff like this all the time, and Lily does too, we use a lot of experimental data, but we even know sometimes we don't release it because it's not, we don't want people to think it's an official forecast.
It's the double-edged sword of the wonderful society we live in, where anyone can access the data, anyone can verify the data, but then you have to always fact check who is posting on this Facebook page. Oh, it's Brad? Okay.
Yeah.
This is accountable.
And that's why I like looking at these as tools, right? Anybody can go to Lowe's. You can buy every tool a contractor can use, right? But very few of us should be rewiring a power box, doing plumbing, building a house. Just because you can buy and go get the same tools doesn't mean you know how to. It still takes a craftsman or a contractor, in our case a meteorologist, to interpret the data. And we actually have sound science that shows, hey, we can do better with the tools combined than just the tools by themselves or just humans. I always like to tell people too that, like, one of my favorite apps, and this is no endorsement, is Waze, right? Waze, the GPS app. The thing I love about it, it's Google as well. It's got algorithms, it's got automation, but it also has human inputs, right? The crashes, the stuff on the road, the speed traps. So the combination of humans and the technology makes the app amazing. And in weather, that's the way it works as well. The combination of these great algorithms and AI combined with humans is going to end up with the best forecast. In the Hurricane Center, they're the best example of this. Just look at their forecast skill. It is unbelievable. So I think we'll probably talk more about this as we go into the hurricane season, as AI becomes a bigger part. And we'll be tracking these storms through the evening. You see them moving up from Georgia. So we'll keep a close eye on those as we get into the evening hours. And if we have to, we'll cut back into WCNC Plus. We'll talk with Vanessa about this, but it's probably going to be closer to 11 o'clock. But as always, every night, we almost run out of time all the time, is don't leave. In 2 minutes, Vanessa Rufus is going to be back in here talking about the breaking news stories of the day, and there's a lot going on news-wise, and we'll join you again tonight at 11. See you then.